Violence turns cowardice into wisdom, like water into wine, wrote Karl Kraus of the First World War. In that brutal war, innocent civilians were terrorized in their thousands, in a practice which has continued until the present day. These images show the darkest side of war. These ornate Habsburg palaces are a reminder of an era many Austrians remember as the glorious heyday. Few know about the brutal war crimes committed in the name of the Habsburg Empire. During the First World War, the eastern Slavic parts of the empire suffered terrible persecution. Thousands of innocent civilians were killed. Historian Anton Holzner specializes in searching for images of the atrocities committed by Habsburg forces during the Great War. He is forced to travel across the world in his search because the images are not welcome in Austria. Even here in Vienna's famous Heeresgeschichtliche Museum, there are just a few. Images like these. Thousands of civilians died as ethnic minorities were collectively held responsible for military defeats. They are accused of treason and murdered. And all this was keenly documented. Over and over again, Holzer shows us the smiling executioner. Holzer has brought the images together in his book.
These
pictures were passed on by soldiers to their families as evidence of their bravery and fearlessness, their ability to confront and to humiliate the enemies. A central characteristic of the images is the pleasure and violence which the men seem to display. There are clear parallels to images released of American atrocities in Abu Ghraib. My experience is that there is a pattern to extreme violence, which these photographs show. You see this encircling of the victim. The camera reveals laughter and a sense of power. Most commonly, the victims in these pictures are civilians, not enemy combatants. When these pictures are circulated to a wider audience, we see that the violence becomes a fetish.
Triumphiert wird nicht über den Kriegsgegner, sondern triumphiert wird über die Zivilbevölkerung.
Once these photos get into the public domain, it is possible to bring the perpetrators to justice. But strict censorship is often enforced during war. Censorship during the First World War is well documented, but it has also been applied by the Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan. US TV networks held onto the Abu Ghraib images for weeks before releasing them. Pictures of killed or wounded US soldiers are rarely shown. Pictures of dead Iraqis are not shown. In war reportage, we see bullets fired. But where they went, who they hit, we don't know. It is not only media coverage that has suffered from the war on terror. Human rights have also been hit. The Guantanamo Bay camp stands as a symbol. Prisoners detained without charge, without legal rights, without prisoner of war status. Human rights expert Manfred Nowak sees this as a worrying development.
In the
particular case of the fight against terror, what the US and its European allies have done is disastrous. The effects of their actions can be seen through its negative effect on other states affected by terrorism. If the US can use torture, they have no right to criticize human rights abuses in Jordan or Sri Lanka or Indonesia.
Warum kritisieren Sie uns dann in Jordanien oder in Sri Lanka oder in Indonesien?
During the First World War, we saw a war originally concentrated on the front line, spread outwards to the hinterland. The use of terror against civilians became a fixed feature. Attacks against civilian populations did not start with the First World War, and they certainly did not end with the armistice. Since the Second World War, in Vietnam, and even today in Iraq and Afghanistan, war has always affected civilian populations. However, it is rare that the official record shows this. Most international wars are not solely between soldiers. They are also wars which involve civilians. And very sadly, this tendency is only increasing with modern styles of warfare. It must be made clear to the global community that human rights are extremely important, and never more so than during the time of war.
Menschenrechte auch im Krieg weiterhin gelten.
The reality of war is often very different to what people expect. This exhibition about the crimes of the Wehrmacht documents the systematic use of terror by the Nazis against civilian populations. Vietnam. American use of napalm. Napalm caused terrible damage to both soldiers and civilians. The genocide in Bosnia, only a few hours' flight from Europe's biggest cities. A war on civilians before the gaze of the world, expulsions, executions and rape. A situation that Europe vowed would never happen again after the terrors of World War II.
Zum ersten Mal wirklich in der Geschichte der Menschheit.
For the first time in the history of mankind, rape was deliberately used for the purpose of ethnic cleansing. Not only for the humiliation of women, but to increase the population of one particular community.
Frau dann auch dieses Kind zur Welt bringt.
But the Muslim community rejected the babies that were born from this rape. Now we have to deal with the traumas of these children, who are now 16 or 17.
Diese Kinder, das war im Jahr 92, 93, die sind jetzt 16, 17 Jahre alt bald.
In Bosnia, as in Iraq, war creates misery for civilian populations. Likewise in Afghanistan, even if terror against the civilian population is not direct, collateral damage is an inevitable consequence of American reluctance to endanger their soldiers. Civilians pay the price from aerial bombardments. And even when the war is over, it is hard to find peace. After conflict, everything changes. There is fear on one hand, hatred on the other.
Ich würde meinen, dass in Europa Rassismus, Fremdenfeindlichkeit das große Menschenrechtsproblem.
We need to improve the way we deal with refugees or migrants that come to Europe.
Menschen umgehen, nur weil sie nicht unsere europäische privilegierte Staatsbürgerschaft haben, ob das jetzt Flüchtlinge sind, Migranten.
We've built a fortress. People who come because they are poor or persecuted are treated as second-class citizens.
Sind Menschen nach ihrer Nationalität einzuteilen und dann in Privilegierte und eben Diskriminierte.
Meine Schuhe!